Crikey, mate, here we are on the wild streets of Watchpoint Gibraltar, and as you can see, we have some very rare footage for you all today. It is Genji on the payload. Now, I don't know why I'm trying to explain this like I'm Steve Irwin, because it's frankly quite embarrassing. But wait, why is Genji on the payload? Yes, I know we've all seen the memes. Genji should be on the payload. Rare footage of Genji on the payload. Genji, why aren't you on the objective? You know, these things are all over the Overwatch subreddit, and frankly, they spread a lot of misinformation about the game. There are a lot of heroes that shouldn't be on the payload, and more often than you might think, there are times where your whole team should be ignoring the objective. Yes, I said it. Your entire team should entirely ignore the objective, literally. Not like the new word literally, that doesn't mean literally, but like the old definition of literally that actually meant literally. Ignore the objective. Now, this is pretty vague, and I know you're probably confused right now, and you may be headed for that dislike button, but I assure you what I'm saying is true. Let's go over it today and talk about why and when you should be ignoring the objective in Overwatch, because it'll actually help you win a lot of games on certain maps, Watchpoint Gibraltar being one of them. So first, let's categorize the heroes and talk about which heroes should be on the objective, off the objective, and when they should be in these places. We're going to start off with flankers, because people like Genji and Tracer get a lot of flack for this for sometimes no reason. Flankers are the people that are supposed to put pressure on the enemy team from the sides or behind. Attacking at a different angle allows them to get an advantage in fights. However, I've seen teams begging Genjis and Tracers to stay on the objective where they're really not effective. Some objectives, yes, it is okay for Genji and Tracer to attack, and those objectives are like the capture point objectives. And sometimes even then they should be attacking the enemy team from different angles and skirting around the sides of the objective to, you know, really surprise the enemy team. But payloads especially, honestly, flankers should rarely be on them. Flankers should be ahead of the payload, putting pressure on the enemy team so they aren't focusing on the rest of your team. If you're a good flanker, if you're a good Genji or a Tracer, and you're diving on the enemy team's supports constantly, they have to put a lot of focus on you, and when the focus is on you, they're not going to be focusing the objective, usually the payload, as much. Now, like I said, on capture point maps, this is a little bit different, because flankers can still flank when they're on the objective. Sometimes the capture points are pretty big. However, there are times when they shouldn't be, and we're actually going to talk about this more in the section where we talk about when your whole team should ignore the objective. But for now, just know, flankers should rarely be on the payload. Over time, yes, they'll be on the payload. Also, you know, times where you need to be on the payload because that's where the enemy team is. Yes, you'll be on the payload then. But generally, you shouldn't be there as a flanker. Some other people that generally shouldn't be on the objective include Hanzo, Widowmaker, and Pharah because of their very powerful ranged damage. Hanzo is somewhat acceptable because, you know, his range damage is only medium range. So there are some times when actually being on the objective, whether it be a capture point or a payload, is good. But for Widowmaker and Pharah, being on the objective puts them at a way higher risk than they need to be at. They're both effective from farther ranges. Widowmaker somewhere up high sniping, and Pharah obviously up high in the air, raining down her AoE fire from above. Both of them really should be firing at the objective and helping their team from farther away and never really on it. And then finally, the last hero that shouldn't be on the objective, I would say, is Ana, because, well, she also has very long range, and she can heal her teammates from long range, so putting herself closer to the enemy team is only giving them an advantage. She should stay farther back. For pretty much the rest of the heroes in the game, though, you should be good to actually push the objective or defend on the objective or perform actions like that. People like McCree and Soldier and Reaper, all very good at offensively pushing objectives. You know, Mei is also very good on the objective because she can freeze people, and all the tanks are pretty much meant to be in the front line soaking up damage. And then even the rest of the supports are all very close ranged, maybe with the exception of Zenyatta, but these people are people that, yes, should be on the payload, should be on the capture point, and really trying to take it when you're on the attacking team, and when you're on the defending team, defending it as well. Now, I did also say there are times where your whole team should ignore the objective, and this is arguably more important than the section where we talked about heroes that should avoid it. And this is because sometimes, actually a lot of the time, people put too much emphasis on the objective, and they forget the fact that there's an enemy team defending it. If the enemy team has high ground above you, and you just keep trying to push the payload below them, you're gonna get hammered. They have the high ground advantage. They will destroy your team, and every time you push the objective, you're gonna push push it marginally because they're just going to kill you all, and then they'll move the payload back. That doesn't sound very effective, does it? Well, if the defending team has a big advantage over you in position, whether it be height or, good cover, you need to focus down them first. Yes, you need to entirely ignore the objective, because once the enemy team is dead, that's when you can push it. If anyone on the enemy team is alive, you can bet they're going to try to stop you from pushing it. So you really need to prioritize kills, and I feel like we have this mindset in Overwatch where people say you shouldn't be doing this. They say this isn't TDM, this is an objective game, you need to play the objective. But the reality is, it is kind of TDM. You need to kill the enemy team to push the objective, because if they're on it, you can't capture it. So there are a lot of times when you need to prioritize the enemy team over taking the objective. Let's go over a few of them here and discuss how you should be approaching the enemy team if they have an advantage over you, and how you should usually not involve the objective with it. Let's talk about the first instance, which is when the enemy team has high ground over you and you just can't seem to kill them. They do have an advantage over you. It is easier shooting down than up because there's more cover when you're in the upward position. The enemy supports are likely away from the edge you're shooting at, and it's really generally going to be much harder to kill the enemy team when they have the high ground over you, especially if you're running similar comps, or they're running a comp that really enjoys or favors having the high ground. What you should be doing in this situation is, for a second, ignore that the objective exists and find a way to make the fight more even. Sometimes that is taking high ground yourself. Maybe high ground across from the enemy team will work. Maybe flanking the entire enemy team with your team, taking a route behind them, could also work. You really need to make sure the enemy team doesn't have a huge advantage over you in fights, because if they have this advantage, this natural advantage, and you keep pushing in a way where they are favored, you're never going to take the point unless you get really lucky with your ultimates. So if they have high ground, try to get high ground yourself, try to flank them and contest their high ground, or maybe even try a gimmicky solution like getting Pharah to knock them off, or get a D.Va to knock them off, or maybe even switch to a dive composition and jump up there with them and try to take out their supports with your diving heroes. All of these are much better solutions than trying to fight when the enemy team has an advantage over you if they're looking down on an objective or looking down on the payload, or just have a better area of cover than you. Make sure you're trying to even out the fight. Now, I should give a disclaimer to this though, because at lower ranks, sometimes teams know to take the high ground, but they don't know how to use it. If the enemy team is shooting down at you and they have an advantage, but they're never really taking it, or they're never really breaking your Reinhardt shield, and you're pushing the objective freely, it's okay to keep doing that. Like, sometimes I see teams on Route 66 standing on top of these saloons and buildings, but they never drop down to stop the payload from moving. If that's the case, just move the payload. Really, I only recommend switching up tactics, especially on the attacking team, when what you're doing isn't working. So, try the payload method first, and when that doesn't work, that's when you know you need to take the high ground, or flank them, or do something different. So, in the end, you got to remember the objective is still the most important thing. That is how you win games. You can't score points without capturing the objective, and you can't win games without doing so either. The key is realizing when the enemy team is in the way of the objective and dealing with them before you deal with it. You have to sometimes just get off of it to kill the enemy team, to then get back on it. Hopefully this video was helpful to you all. If it was, be sure to leave a like down below, and also check out this video on screen. It was handpicked by an algorithm on YouTube that said you should watch this video. So if I was you, I would watch it, just in case YouTube ever goes evil one day. You want to make sure you're on their good side. You watched all their videos. So that's just my 2 cents. Anyway, have a good one. I'll see y'all later. Lone Hawk out.